When I became a single mom, my family insulted and disowned me. Years later, they begged for forgiveness, but my answer left them in silence. Nobody in my family supported me when I became a single mother, but once I started making a lot of money, they all wanted to get close to me. I never expected my family's reaction to hurt so much. Maybe I was naive, thinking that blood meant something more than it actually did. When I told them I was pregnant at 22, sitting in our cramped living room with the smell of my mother's burnt coffee filling the air, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. My mother's face went through several expressions: surprise, disappointment, then something that looked like genuine disgust. She set down her mug so hard it cracked against the wooden table. "How could you be so careless?" were her first words. Not congratulations, not asking if I was okay, just pure judgment wrapped in maternal disappointment. Dad didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes glued to the evening news, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. When the commercial break came, he finally spoke without turning around. "I suppose he's not going to marry you." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation disguised as resigned acceptance. "He's not ready for this responsibility," I tried to explain, my voice smaller than I intended. "But I want to keep the baby. I can handle this." That's when my older brother Marcus actually laughed, from the kitchen doorway. "Handle this? You can barely handle paying your car insurance on time. You think raising a kid is some kind of joke?" My younger sister Emma just shook her head, fingers typing furiously on her phone. Great. Now I'll have to explain to everyone at college why my sister got knocked up by some loser who won't even claim the baby. She looked up at me with genuine annoyance. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for the rest of us?" The words stung more than any physical blow could have. This wasn't how I'd imagined telling them. I'd pictured concern, maybe some disappointment, but ultimately support. Instead, I got treated like I'd committed some unforgivable crime against the family reputation. "What will the neighbors think?" Mom finally said, rubbing her temples like my pregnancy had given her a migraine. "Mrs. Patterson next door has been bragging about her daughter's engagement for months now. What am I supposed to say when she asks about you?" "Maybe you could say you're going to be a grandmother," I suggested quietly, though I already knew that wasn't the response she wanted. Dad finally turned around, and the disappointment in his eyes made my chest tight. "You made your bed, sweetheart. Now you get to lie in it. Don't expect us to clean up this mess for you." The rest of the evening dissolved into uncomfortable silence and whispered conversations between my parents that stopped whenever I entered the room. Marcus left without saying goodbye, and Emma went upstairs, probably to call her friends and complain about her irresponsible sister. That night, lying in my childhood bed, surrounded by participation trophies and faded boy band posters, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The people I'd always counted on to catch me when I fell had just stepped aside and watched me hit the ground. I placed my hand on my still flat stomach and made a promise that would define the next decade of my life. I would prove them all wrong, not just about my ability to raise this child, but about who I really was underneath their low expectations. The weeks following my announcement turned our house into a war zone of passive aggression and cold shoulders. Mom started declining invitations to book club meetings and canceled her monthly coffee dates with Mrs. Patterson. When I asked her about it, she gave me a look that could freeze water. "I need time to figure out how to explain your situation," she said, emphasizing situation like it was a terminal diagnosis. Some things require delicate handling. The delicate handling apparently included pretending I didn't exist. Family dinners became awkward affairs where conversations died the moment I sat down. Marcus would check his phone constantly. Emma would eat in silence, and my parents discussed everything except the elephant in the room, or rather, the baby growing inside it. When I mentioned needing help setting up the crib I'd bought secondhand, Dad looked at me like I'd asked him to donate a kidney. "That's not really my area of expertise," he said, though he'd helped Marcus move apartments 3 times in the past year. The financial support I'd hoped for never materialized. When I mentioned struggling to afford prenatal vitamins on my part-time retail salary, Mom suggested I make better spending choices. This from a woman who spent $40 getting her nails done every 2 weeks. "You decided to go through with this pregnancy," Emma said during one particularly tense breakfast. "That means handling all the consequences yourself. We shouldn't have to sacrifice our own plans because you couldn't use protection." Even worse than the lack of financial help was the emotional isolation. My childhood bedroom felt like a prison cell where I was serving time for the crime of getting pregnant. They made it clear I was a source of shame they wished they could hide from the world. The breaking point came during my 6th month, when I asked if they'd like to come to my next ultrasound appointment. I thought seeing their grandchild might soften their hearts, might remind them that this baby was family too. Mom's response was swift and brutal. "I think it's better if you handle these appointments alone. We don't want to give people the wrong impression about our involvement in this situation." Dad nodded in agreement. "You're an adult who made adult choices. Time to start acting like one." That night I sat in my car outside a Target parking lot, staring at the ultrasound photo of my baby. The technician had been so excited, pointing out tiny features and explaining how healthy everything looked. I'd imagined rushing home to share that joy with my family, maybe even earning a smile from my mother. Instead, I had nobody to call, nobody who cared that my baby had a strong heartbeat and perfectly formed fingers, nobody who wanted to hear that the due date was confirmed for late January. I made a decision that would define my next chapter. I started looking for my own apartment. If I was going to be completely alone in this, I might as well be alone somewhere that didn't constantly remind me how unwanted I was. When I told them I was moving out, the relief on their faces was unmistakable. Probably for the best, Dad said, not even looking up from his newspaper. Give everyone some space to adjust. Mom's only concern was practical. Make sure you have your mail forwarded so nothing shows up here with your name on it. As I packed my few belongings into cardboard boxes, I realized they weren't just letting me leave. They were encouraging it. Their own daughter, carrying their first grandchild, had become so inconvenient that my absence felt like a gift to them. My daughter arrived on a freezing Tuesday in January, 3 weeks early and determined to make her entrance during a snowstorm that shut down half the city. I drove myself to the hospital at 2 in the morning, contractions coming every 5 minutes, windshield wipers fighting against the ice. The labor was brutal, 18 hours of pain that felt like my body was being torn apart and rebuilt. But the moment they placed that tiny perfect baby on my chest, everything else disappeared. She had dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through me, as if she already understood. We were a team of 2 against the world. What's her name? The nurse asked, pen poised over the birth certificate. Lily, I whispered, remembering how my grandmother used to grow lilies in her backyard garden. At least someone in our family had shown me unconditional love, even if she'd been gone for 5 years. My phone sat silent on the bedside table. I'd sent one text to my mother when labor started. Baby coming now. No response. No frantic calls asking for updates. No worried parents rushing to the hospital to meet their first grandchild. When visiting hours started, I watched other new mothers receive flowers, balloons, and tearful grandparents eager to hold the newest family member. My room remained empty except for one visitor, Mrs. Chen from downstairs in my apartment building, who brought homemade soup and stayed for an hour cooing over Lily. Your family must be so excited, she said innocently, assuming they were simply running late. They're busy, I lied, not ready to admit the truth to this kind woman who barely knew me. I took Lily home to our tiny one-bedroom apartment with its squeaky floors and thin walls. I'd prepared as best I could on my limited budget, a crib from Goodwill, baby clothes from discount stores, and enough diapers to last maybe 2 weeks if I was careful. The first weeks were a fog of sleepless nights and constant feeding schedules. Lily had colic, crying for hours straight while I paced the small living room, bouncing her and singing lullabies my grandmother had taught me. During those long, dark nights, I'd sometimes catch myself reaching for my phone to call my mother, forgetting that I was truly on my own. My neighbors turned out to be more supportive than my own blood. Mrs. Chen brought dinner, twice a week. The college student across the hall, Jake, offered to babysit when I needed to grocery shop. Even the elderly man upstairs, Mr. Rodriguez, would knock on my door with hand-knitted baby blankets his late wife had made. This little one deserves all the love in the world, he said one afternoon, watching Lily sleep peacefully in her bouncer. Family isn't always about blood, mija. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most. His words hit harder than I expected. These practical strangers were treating Lily with more warmth and interest than her own grandparents had shown. They asked about her milestones, celebrated when she first smiled, and offered practical help without judgment or conditions. Meanwhile, radio silence from the people who'd raised me. No cards, no calls, no questions about how we were managing. It was as if Lily and I had simply vanished from their universe the day I moved out. I started to understand that their rejection wasn't just about disappointment. It was about fear. Fear of being associated with my mistake. Fear of what people might think. Fear of having their carefully constructed image of the perfect family disrupted by an inconvenient reality. But lying there at night with Lily sleeping on my chest, listening to her tiny heartbeat, I felt something unexpected growing inside me alongside the hurt, determination, not just to survive, but to build something better than what I'd lost. Lily had just turned 2 when the fever spiked to 104 degrees and wouldn't break. I'd been giving her children's medicine for 2 days, but she kept getting worse, listless, refusing to eat, her tiny body burning hot against mine. The emergency room doctor's face was grave as she explained that Lily had developed pneumonia that required immediate hospitalization. We need to start IV antibiotics right away, she said. Without insurance, you're looking at about $12,000 for the treatment and hospital stay. My part-time job at the department store didn't offer health benefits. I'd been paying for basic pediatric visits out of pocket, but this was beyond anything I'd prepared for. The financial counselor at the hospital offered payment plans, but even stretched out, it would mean choosing between keeping our apartment and saving my daughter's life. Sitting in that sterile waiting room while Lily slept in the hospital bed with tubes in her tiny arms, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do again. I called my mother. Hello, her voice was cautious, like she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. Mom, it's me. Lily is in the hospital with pneumonia. She needs treatment that costs $12,000 and I don't have insurance. I know we haven't talked, but she's your granddaughter and I'm desperate. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. I'm sorry to hear the baby is sick, but we made it clear 2 years ago that your decisions were your responsibility. We can't solve every crisis you create. This isn't about my decisions, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is about a sick child who needs help. She's 2 years old, Mom. She's innocent in all this. You chose to have that baby when you couldn't afford to take care of her properly. These are the consequences of that choice. The line went dead. My own mother had hung up on me while my daughter was fighting for her life. I sat there staring at my phone, shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Then, with nothing left to lose, I tried my father. He answered on the first ring. Dad, please, just hear me out. Click. He'd hung up before I could even finish the sentence. Marcus was next. At least he let me explain the situation before delivering his verdict. Look, this is exactly what we were worried about when you decided to keep that baby. You can't afford to be a single mother, and now you expect us to bail you out every time something goes wrong. This is the consequence of your choices." Emma's response was even crueler. "Maybe this will teach you that actions have consequences. We warned you this would happen." That night, while Lily slept fitfully in her hospital bed, I sat beside her making calls to every loan company, credit card company, and charity organization I could find. I sold everything of value I owned, my grandmother's jewelry, my car, even my laptop. Mrs. Chen, who barely knew us, handed me $500 in cash. "For the baby," she said simply. "Children should never suffer for adult problems." Mr. Rodriguez knocked on my hospital room door with an envelope containing $800, apparently his social security check for the month. "My Sophia would have wanted this," he said, referring to his late wife. These strangers showed more compassion in one day than my family had shown in 2 years. As I signed the payment plan paperwork that would keep me in debt for the next 5 years, I made a promise to myself and to Lily. I would never, ever put myself in a position where I needed my family's help again. Whatever it took, however hard I had to work, I would build a life where their rejection couldn't hurt us anymore. The little girl, sleeping peacefully now, her fever finally broken, deserved a mother who could protect her from the cruelty of people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. 3 years had passed since that desperate phone call, and I thought I'd moved beyond the sting of my family's rejection. Lily was 5 now, chattering constantly and full of energy as we made our weekly trip to get groceries. She loved these outings, pointing out colorful packages and helping me compare prices. We were in the frozen foods aisle when I heard the familiar laugh, Emma's high-pitched giggle that used to echo through our childhood home. I turned the corner with our cart and froze. There was my entire extended family gathered around a birthday cake display, clearly celebrating someone's special day. Emma was there with her fiancé, Marcus with his wife, and their twin boys, and my parents beaming as they posed for photos with a cake that read, "Happy 50th birthday, Uncle Jim." My Uncle Jim's birthday. A family celebration I hadn't even known was happening, much less been invited to attend. For a split second, I considered backing away before anyone noticed us. But Lily had already spotted the colorful balloons tied to their shopping cart. "Mommy, look at all the pretty balloons," she said loudly, pointing in their direction. Emma looked up first. Our eyes met across the supermarket aisle, and I watched her face go through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, then something that looked almost like panic. She quickly looked away and started talking animatedly to her fiancé, as if she hadn't seen us at all. Marcus noticed us next. He whispered something to his wife, who immediately turned to look. I saw her mouth form a small O of recognition before she too turned away, suddenly very interested in reading ingredient labels on frozen pizza boxes. But it was my grandmother's reaction that hurt the most. Grandma Rose had always been my favorite, the one person who'd shown me genuine affection during childhood. She'd been the one to teach me how to braid my hair and had always slipped me an extra $1 when Mom wasn't looking. Now she looked directly at me, holding Lily's hand, and for just a moment, I saw recognition and maybe even warmth in her eyes. But then she glanced at the rest of the family, and something shifted. She turned her head away deliberately, pretending she hadn't seen us. "Mommy, do you know those people?" Lily asked innocently, tugging on my jacket. The lady with the gray hair was looking at me. "No, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't think so." We finished our shopping in silence while they continued their celebration just 2 aisles over. I could hear their laughter and animated conversation. The sound of a family enjoying each other's company. The family I was no longer part of. As we headed to the checkout, I caught one more glimpse of them loading their party supplies into their carts. Uncle Jim was there too, looking exactly the same as he had 6 years ago. He'd probably asked about me at some point. Maybe they told him I was doing my own thing or had moved away. Easier than explaining that they'd cut me off for the crime of becoming a single mother. Walking to our car, Lily skipped alongside me, completely unaware that she'd just met her grandparents, aunt, uncle, and cousins for the first time. To her, they were just strangers in a grocery store with pretty balloons. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat in our small living room and let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. It wasn't just that they had excluded me from a family gathering, it was the deliberate way they pretended I didn't exist when faced with the reality of me and my daughter. I realized then that I'd been harboring a secret hope that time might heal our rift, that eventually they'd reach out and want to be part of Lily's life. That moment in the grocery store killed that hope completely. They didn't want reconciliation, they wanted erasure. In their perfect family narrative, Lily and I simply didn't exist. The promotion came completely out of left field. I'd been working as a medical billing specialist for 3 years, quietly processing insurance claims and keeping my head down. When my supervisor called me into her office that Tuesday morning, I expected another routine assignment. Instead, she offered me the position of department manager. "Your accuracy rate is the highest we've ever seen," she explained. "Plus, you've been taking those online coding certification courses on your own time. We need someone with your dedication to oversee the new digital transition." The salary increase was substantial, nearly double what I'd been making. For the first time since Lily's birth, I could breathe financially. We could move to a better apartment, maybe even start a college fund for her. Within a month, the changes in our lifestyle were noticeable. I traded my beat-up Honda for a reliable used Toyota. We moved from our cramped 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood with a playground. Lily started taking dance classes, something I'd always dreamed of giving her but could never afford. The local newspaper ran a small feature about young professionals making a difference in healthcare administration. My photo appeared alongside 3 other managers with a caption mentioning my innovative approaches to medical billing efficiency. It was barely 2 column inches, but it was public recognition of my professional success. Apparently, news travels fast in a small city. Within a week of the article's publication, I got my first contact from the family grapevine. My cousin Rachel, who I hadn't spoken to in 6 years, sent me a friend request on social media along with a casual message. "Hey girl, saw your picture in the paper. So impressive. I'm actually looking for work right now and wondered if your company is hiring. Would love to catch up sometime." I stared at that message for a long time. Rachel had been at plenty of family gatherings where my name was probably never mentioned. She'd certainly never reached out when I was struggling to pay for Lily's hospital bills or when I was working 2 part-time jobs just to keep our lights on. But now that I had a management position and my picture was in the paper, suddenly she wanted to catch up. 2 days later, I ran into Mrs. Patterson, our old neighbor, at the pharmacy. Her face lit up when she saw me, which was strange since she'd always been cold after learning about my pregnancy. "Oh my goodness, I heard about your promotion," she gushed. "Your mother must be so proud. I always told her you were a smart girl who would figure things out eventually." I wondered when exactly she'd told my mother that, since Mom had specifically mentioned Mrs. Patterson as one of the neighbors she'd been too embarrassed to face when I got pregnant. The most telling incident happened at the grocery store where I'd encountered my family a year earlier. I was loading groceries into my new car when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Uncle Jim walking toward me with a big smile. "Well, look who's doing well for herself," he said, eyeing my car and the name-brand groceries I could finally afford. "I've been hearing good things about you from around town. That promotion sounds like quite an achievement." He spoke as if we were old friends catching up, not like I'd been deliberately excluded from his birthday party the year before. He even asked about Lily, though he'd never shown any interest in meeting his great niece before my financial situation improved. "Your parents must be thrilled about how things have turned out," he said, fishing for information about our relationship. I gave him a neutral smile. I'm sure they have their own opinions about my life. That night, I sat at my kitchen table processing what was happening. After 6 years of complete silence, family members were suddenly noticing my existence again, not because they missed me or wanted to meet Lily, but because I'd achieved something that made me useful to them. The timing wasn't coincidental. These weren't people who'd had a change of heart about family relationships. These were people who'd heard I might have something to offer them now. The business opportunity came through a connection at work. Dr. Martinez, one of our biggest clients, mentioned she was looking for someone to handle billing services for her expanding practice and several colleague referrals. When she offered me the contract, I realized this could be my chance to build something of my own. I spent 3 months researching, planning, and saving every penny for startup costs. Working nights and weekends, I built a client base and registered my medical billing consultancy, Precision Healthcare Solutions. Within 6 months, I had 12 medical practices as clients and was earning more than triple my old salary. The local business journal featured my company in their emerging entrepreneurs section. The article included a photo of me in my small office, surrounded by computer screens and medical coding manuals. They highlighted how I'd built a successful business from the ground up while raising a young daughter alone. The day the article came out, my phone started ringing. First was my cousin Rachel again, this time calling instead of just messaging. "I saw the article about your business. Congratulations. I've actually been thinking about changing careers, and medical billing sounds fascinating. Maybe you could teach me the ropes. I'm a fast learner and really motivated." Then came my cousin David, who'd never spoken to me, even during family gatherings when we were kids. Suddenly, he was interested in discussing investment opportunities and wondered if I needed a business partner with his retail management experience. But the call that really got my attention came from Emma. My sister, who'd been embarrassed by my existence for 7 years, was suddenly reaching out with sisterly concern. "I can't believe I had to read about your success in the newspaper," she said, her voice perfectly calibrated to sound hurt. "Why didn't you tell family about this amazing business you built? We would have celebrated with you." I almost laughed at the audacity. Would you have? Because I don't recall much celebrating when I was working 3 jobs to pay for Lily's medical expenses. "That was different," she said quickly. "We were all dealing with our own struggles back then, but now that you've proven how capable you are, maybe it's time to put the past behind us. Family should support each other, right?" The irony was breathtaking. Now that I'd proven my capability by becoming financially successful, suddenly I deserved family support. When I'd needed help the most, I was told to handle my own problems, but now that I didn't need their help anymore, they wanted to offer it. Marcus called next with an even more transparent approach. "I heard about your business from Emma. Pretty impressive stuff. Listen, I've been thinking about switching careers myself. Construction work is hard on the body, you know. Maybe you could bring me on as an employee or something. Family business sounds nice." The most surprising contact came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson stopped by my new office, claiming she happened to be in the neighborhood. She spent 20 minutes praising my success before finally getting to her point. "My daughter Jennifer is graduating with her associate degree next month," she said. "I was hoping you might have an entry-level position available. She's such a hard worker, and I know how much you value family connections." Family connections from the woman who'd whispered about my situation to neighbors 6 years ago. Each conversation followed the same pattern: praise for my success, followed by requests for favors or opportunities. Not one person acknowledged the years of silence or explained their sudden interest in reconnecting. They all acted as if our estrangement had been some kind of mutual misunderstanding that could be brushed aside now that I was successful. That evening, I sat in my new car outside Lily's dance studio, watching her practice through the window. She was 7 now, confident and happy, completely unaware that half her relatives had spent the day trying to figure out how to benefit from her mother's success. I realized I was at a crossroads. I could let these people back into our lives and pretend the past didn't matter, or I could maintain the boundaries they'd forced me to build and remember exactly why those boundaries existed in the first place. The first real test came when my mother called me directly for the first time in 7 years. Her voice was carefully modulated, warm in a way that felt practiced and artificial. "Honey, I've been thinking about you so much lately," she began, as if we'd spoken just last week instead of having our last conversation end with her hanging up on me. "I saw the article about your business in the paper. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. She'd earned a moment of awkwardness after years of silence. "I was hoping we could get together for coffee," she continued. "It's been too long since we talked, and I'd love to hear about everything that's been happening in your life. I miss having my daughter around. Miss having me around." The daughter she'd been too embarrassed to acknowledge for 7 years suddenly became someone she missed. "I'm pretty busy with the business these days," I said neutrally. Of course. You must be so busy with such a successful company. Maybe I could come by your office sometime. I'd love to see what you've built." 2 days later, she showed up unannounced during lunch hour, dressed in her best outfit and carrying a gift bag. She moved through my office like she was conducting an inspection, commenting on everything from my computer setup to the framed degrees on my wall. "This is so impressive, sweetheart. You always were the smart one in the family." She handed me the gift bag, which contained a coffee mug that read "World's Best Daughter" and some expensive chocolates. "I brought you a little something to celebrate your success." She spent an hour asking detailed questions about my business model, client base, and revenue projections. When I mentioned that Lily was excelling in school and dance classes, she nodded politely but didn't ask to see any photos or request details about her granddaughter's life. The real purpose of her visit became clear when she started sharing family updates I hadn't asked for. "Your father's been having some health issues lately. Nothing serious, but medical bills add up, you know. And Marcus lost his construction job last month. The economy is so difficult for working families right now." She painted a picture of a family facing various financial struggles, all while sitting in the office of the daughter they'd abandoned when she needed help most. "It's wonderful that you're in a position to help people now," she said meaningfully. "Families should take care of each other when they have the means to do so." A week later, Marcus showed up at my apartment with his 8-year-old twins in tow. He introduced them to Lily as her cousins, creating an awkward situation where she was meeting relatives she'd never known existed. "Uncle Marcus," she said excitedly, because I'd mentioned her uncles in passing over the years, though I'd never indicated whether she'd ever meet them. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. "Sorry it's taken me so long to visit. Adult life gets complicated sometimes." After the kids went to play in Lily's room, Marcus got down to business. He talked about his financial struggles, his wife's health problems, and how difficult it was to support a family in the current economy. "I was hoping maybe you could help me get back on my feet," he said. "Nothing too crazy, just enough to cover rent and groceries until I find another job." Family helps family, right? The phrase "family helps family" became a constant refrain. Everyone who contacted me seemed to have memorized the same script about family obligations and mutual support. Emma called to ask if I could co-sign a car loan for her. Uncle Jim wondered if I needed a receptionist and could hire his unemployed daughter. Even distant cousins I barely remembered reached out through social media with various requests and opportunities. Each conversation began with praise for my success and expressions of pride in my accomplishments. But they all led to the same place, requests for money, jobs, or business opportunities that would benefit them while contributing nothing to my life or Lily's well-being. The emotional manipulation reached new heights when my mother called crying about Dad's serious heart condition. According to her tearful account, he needed expensive medication that insurance wouldn't fully cover, and they were facing financial ruin trying to keep him healthy. "I know we haven't always been perfect parents," she sobbed into the phone. "But he raised you, and family has obligations to each other. You have the means to help now, and it would break my heart if something happened to him because we couldn't afford his treatment." When I asked for details about his condition and which medications he needed, her story became vague and inconsistent. She couldn't name the specific heart condition or explain why insurance was denying coverage for essential medication. "The doctors used such complicated terms," she said dismissively. "All I know is he needs help, and you're the only one in the family who can provide it." The guilt trip was expertly crafted. She'd positioned me as either the dutiful daughter who saved her father's life, or the heartless child who let him suffer because of old grudges. Marcus took a more aggressive approach. He showed up at my office unannounced, interrupting a client meeting to demand a private conversation. His face was red with anger, and he spoke in the loud, confrontational tone he'd used to intimidate me during childhood. "What's your problem?" he demanded. "Mom called you about Dad's medication, and you haven't even responded. Do you hate us so much that you'd let your own father die just to prove some petty point?" I kept my voice calm and professional, aware that my staff could hear through the thin office walls. I asked for medical documentation and insurance information, so I could understand the situation better. "I haven't received any of that." "Documentation?" he scoffed. "What are you, some kind of insurance investigator now? This is our father we're talking about. You either care about family or you don't." He leaned forward, using his height to try to intimidate me the way he had when we were teenagers. "You know what I think? I think success has made you cold. You've forgotten where you came from and who helped you get there." The irony of that statement was staggering. Who helped me get there, Marcus? Because I distinctly remember being told to handle my own problems when I needed help. That was different, he said quickly. You made choices that put you in that situation. Dad didn't choose to have heart problems. Emma's approach was more subtle but equally manipulative. She started showing up at Lily's school events, playing the devoted aunt role in front of other parents. She'd gush about how proud she was of her niece and make comments about how important family connections were. It's so wonderful that Lily has such a strong family support system, she'd say loudly enough for other parents to hear. We all just adore her. After one particularly theatrical performance at Lily's dance recital, she cornered me in the parking lot with tears in her eyes. I can't believe how much I've missed of her childhood, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I regret so much about how we handled things when you were younger, but we can't change the past. We can only build better relationships moving forward. Then came the real message. I'm actually facing some serious financial problems right now. My student loans are crushing me, and I might lose my apartment. I was hoping maybe you could help me consolidate my debt. Nothing huge, just enough to get me back on track so I can be a better aunt to Lily. The requests became more frequent and more demanding. Uncle Jim called to say his daughter's wedding needed financial help because family should contribute to important milestones. My cousin David showed up with a business proposal that required a $20,000 investment from me with no guarantee of return. But the most manipulative moment came when they started using Lily directly. During one of Marcus's visits, I overheard him telling her about all the fun family activities she was missing. Your cousins go fishing with Grandpa every weekend, he told her, and Grandma makes the best chocolate chip cookies for family dinners. Maybe if your mom wasn't so stubborn, you could be part of all that fun. That night, Lily asked me why she couldn't go to family dinners like her cousins did. The innocent confusion in her 8-year-old eyes made me realize they were now using my own daughter as a weapon in their campaign to manipulate me. The message was clear: pay up, or your daughter will keep suffering from the consequences of your selfishness. They'd turned my love for Lily into leverage against me, knowing that her happiness was my greatest vulnerability. I realized then that this wasn't about reconciliation or family healing. This was about extraction, getting as much as they could from me while giving nothing in return except the promise of including Lily in the family she'd been excluded from her entire life. The pressure campaign intensified when Dad himself finally made an appearance. He showed up at my office on a Thursday afternoon, looking older and frailer than I remembered, moving slowly and breathing heavily as he climbed the stairs. Hello, sweetheart, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with obvious difficulty. I hope you don't mind me dropping by like this. His appearance was clearly calculated for maximum emotional impact. He wore an old cardigan I remembered from my childhood, and he kept one hand pressed to his chest as if his heart was bothering him. Your mother tells me you've been asking questions about my medical situation, he said sadly. I understand your skepticism. I probably deserve it after how we handled things when you were younger. But I'm hoping you can find it in your heart to help your old dad in his time of need. He pulled out a prescription bottle and set it on my desk. This medication costs $800 a month, and insurance only covers 60%. At my age, on a fixed income, that's just not manageable. The bottle was real enough, though I noticed the label had been partially obscured. When I asked to see the full prescription information and his insurance documentation, he became defensive. I didn't come here to be interrogated like a criminal, he said, his voice taking on the stern tone I remembered from childhood. I came here hoping my successful daughter might want to help her father stay alive. The guilt trip was expertly delivered. He talked about being proud of my accomplishments, about regretting the distance in our relationship, and about hoping we could build something better while there was still time. I may not have many years left, he said heavily. It would mean everything to me to spend them getting to know my granddaughter and rebuilding our family. But when I asked specific questions about his condition, his answers were evasive. He couldn't explain why he needed this particular expensive medication, or what treatment alternatives had been explored. The next week, Emma showed up at my apartment with a different crisis. She was crying before she even made it through the door, mascara streaming down her cheeks in dramatic black lines. I'm going to lose everything, she sobbed, throwing herself onto my couch. My apartment, my car, everything. According to her tear-filled story, she'd co-signed loans for her ex-boyfriend and was now responsible for debts she couldn't pay. She needed $15,000 immediately to avoid losing her home. I know I don't deserve your help after how we treated you, she cried, but I'm desperate. And you're the only family member who has the means to help me. I'll pay you back, I promise. I just need time to get back on my feet. She painted a picture of herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control, conveniently forgetting that she'd been the one to suggest I handle my own problems when I was facing my own financial crisis. The emotional manipulation reached peak intensity when they organized a family intervention. Mom called to invite me to Sunday dinner, claiming it would just be immediate family and that they wanted to discuss healing our relationships. I arrived to find the entire extended family gathered in my parents' living room, all looking at me with expressions of concern and disappointment. It felt like walking into an ambush disguised as a family meeting. We're worried about you, Mom began, her voice full of artificial concern. Success has changed you, and not necessarily for the better. You've become cold and suspicious of the people who love you most. Uncle Jim nodded gravely. We understand you went through some difficult times, but holding grudges isn't healthy. Family forgiveness is important. They'd crafted a narrative where I was the problem, the bitter, successful daughter who'd forgotten her roots and abandoned her struggling family. Each person shared stories about financial hardships and health problems, building a case for why I had a moral obligation to help. You have so much now, Grandma Rose said softly. Surely you can spare something for the people who raised you and loved you your whole life. The coordinated nature of their appeal made it clear this had been planned and rehearsed. They weren't asking for help, they were demanding it, using guilt, shame, and family obligation as weapons to force my compliance. I sat in that familiar living room, surrounded by faces that had once meant everything to me, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. They wanted honesty. They were about to get it. You want to talk about family? I said, my voice cutting through their rehearsed concerns. Let's talk about family. Let's talk about the family that told a pregnant 22-year-old to handle her own problems. The room went silent. Mom started to speak, but I held up my hand. No, you asked for this conversation. You get to hear all of it. I stood up, needing the physical advantage as I faced them. Let's talk about the family that was too embarrassed by my pregnancy to attend their own granddaughter's birth. The family that canceled social events rather than explain my existence to neighbors. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Now, honey, that's not entirely fair. Fair? I laughed, and the sound was harsh even to my own ears. You want to discuss what's fair? When Lily was 2 years old and fighting pneumonia in the hospital, I called every single person in this room begging for help with $12,000 in medical bills. Do you remember what you told me, Dad? He looked down at his hands, his earlier fragility replaced by obvious discomfort. You hung up on me, actually hung up, while your granddaughter was in intensive care. And you, Mom, told me that my decisions were my responsibility, and that you couldn't solve every crisis I created. We were going through our own difficulties then, Mom said weakly. We all make mistakes when we're under pressure. Mistakes? I turned to Marcus, who was staring at the floor. What was your mistake, brother? When you laughed at me for thinking I could handle being a single mother? Or when you told me that Lily's hospitalization was the consequence of my choices? Marcus finally looked up, his face flushed with anger. You're being vindictive and petty. We're trying to move forward here. And Emma, I continued, ignoring his interruption, your mistake was telling me I was an embarrassment to the family and that you'd have to explain my situation to your college friends. Emma's tears had stopped, replaced by defensive anger. That was years ago. People grow and change. You're right. People do change. I changed. I learned that I couldn't count on any of you when my daughter's life was at stake. I learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or love. Grandma Rose spoke up, her voice trembling. We've always loved you, dear. Sometimes people just handle difficult situations poorly. Loved me? I stared at her, remembering the grocery store incident. You looked right at me and your great-granddaughter in the supermarket and turned away because you didn't want the rest of the family to know you'd acknowledged us. The room erupted in defensive voices, everyone talking at once, trying to justify their actions or minimize their impact. Enough, I shouted, silencing them all. You want to know what's changed about me? I'll tell you exactly what's changed. I used to believe that family meant something unconditional. I used to think that love was supposed to survive disappointment and difficulty. I looked at each of them in turn. But you taught me that your love had conditions. It required me to be successful enough to benefit you, respectable enough not to embarrass you, and desperate enough to need you. You're twisting everything, Marcus said angrily. We're here trying to rebuild relationships and you're throwing the past in our faces. The past? I laughed again. You mean the 8 years where none of you existed in my life or my daughter's life? That past? Or do you mean the recent past where you suddenly developed family feelings the moment you heard I had money? The truth hung heavy in the room. Uncle Jim tried to salvage the situation. We understand you're hurt, but family forgiveness. Stop. My voice was ice cold. Don't you dare talk to me about forgiveness. You want forgiveness? You want family relationships? Then you should have wanted them when I had nothing to offer you except the need for love and support. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. You don't get to abandon someone and then demand access to their success. You don't get to treat a person like a shameful secret and then expect them to fund your lives. Where are you going? Mom called after me. We're not finished talking about this. I turned back one last time. Yes, we are. We're completely finished. The phone calls started immediately after I left that Sunday dinner. My mother called 16 times in the first 2 days, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations. Marcus sent text messages calling me heartless and ungrateful. Emma showed up at my office twice, demanding that security let her speak to me. I changed my phone number and instructed my assistant to screen all calls and visitors. When Dad appeared at my office building the following week, looking frailer than ever and claiming chest pains, I watched from my window as security escorted him to his car under my explicit instructions. You can't be serious, my assistant said, watching the elderly man shuffle away. That's really your father? That's the man who hung up on me when my daughter was dying in the hospital, I replied calmly. Yes, I'm completely serious. The family's reaction to my newfound boundaries was swift and predictable. Within a month, I heard through former mutual acquaintances that I was being painted as the villain in their narrative. I was the heartless daughter who'd forgotten her roots, the cold businesswoman who valued money over family, the ungrateful child who'd abandoned her aging parents. They conveniently left out the 8 years of abandonment that preceded my success, the hospital crisis they did ignored, and the transparent way they'd only renewed contact when I became financially useful to them. I moved Lily and myself to an upscale neighborhood across town where nobody knew our history or had preconceived notions about our family dynamics. I enrolled her in a private school where she thrived academically and socially, surrounded by children whose parents valued education and opportunity over gossip and judgment. Why did we move again? Lily asked one evening as we arranged her books in her new bedroom. Because sometimes we outgrow where we used to live, I told her. Sometimes it's healthy to start fresh somewhere new. She nodded, satisfied with that explanation. At 9 years old, she was confident and happy, completely unaware that she'd been rejected by an entire side of her family before she'd even taken her first breath. My business continued to grow. I hired 6 employees, expanded into medical practice management, and opened a second office. The success felt different now, cleaner somehow, not tainted by the desperate need to prove myself to people who'd never believed in me anyway. When well-meaning acquaintances asked about my family, I developed a standard response: "We're not close." Most people didn't push for details, and those who did learned quickly that it wasn't a topic I discussed. The final contact attempt came 2 years later when Grandma Rose was diagnosed with cancer. Mom sent a letter, an actual handwritten letter to my office, explaining that Rose was dying and wanted to see me and meet her great-granddaughter properly before she passed away. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Grandma Rose had had 11 years to meet Lily. She'd chosen not to, even going so far as to ignore us in public to avoid awkward questions from other family members. Lily, now 11, had built a life filled with friends, activities, and adults who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide them. She had dance teachers who celebrated her achievements, classmates who enjoyed her company, and neighbors who remembered her birthday. She had a mother who would never abandon her when life got difficult, never judge her for making mistakes, and never treat her love as conditional on her usefulness. On quiet evenings when Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table and I was reviewing business reports, I sometimes wondered if I'd made the right choice. The complete severance felt extreme, even to me. But then I'd remember the hospital room where I'd sat alone while my daughter fought pneumonia. I'd remember the grocery store encounter where my own grandmother pretended not to see us. I'd remember the calculated way they'd approached me only after learning about my financial success. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once poisoned, can't be purified. Some people prove through their actions over time that they don't deserve access to your life or your love. My parents lived 20 minutes away but might as well have been on another planet. Marcus continued his construction work, struggling financially and probably still resentful that his successful sister wouldn't bail him out. Emma lost her condo anyway, despite her dramatic pleas for help. Uncle Jim's daughter got married without my contribution, and the family somehow survived without my financial rescue. They'd wanted me to believe I owed them something because of blood relations and childhood history. But I'd learned a more valuable lesson. Family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about who shows up when you need them, who celebrates your successes without expecting payment, and who loves you consistently through both triumph and struggle. Lily and I had built that kind of family with friends, neighbors, colleagues, and each other. We'd created something better than what I'd lost. Something based on choice rather than chance, on love rather than leverage, on presence rather than pressure. The girl who'd cried in a hospital parking lot, desperate for her family's help, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who only value you for what you can give them. I'd built a life where respect wasn't purchased with money, where love wasn't conditional on success, and where my daughter would never have to beg for acceptance from people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. In the end, that was worth more than any family reconciliation could ever be.